Let's move on to the next paper, which is Courtney J. Martin, Art and Black Consciousness, which will deal with Rasheed's contribution to the conference and his dialogue and debate with Frank Bowling. And Courtney is a professor at Vanderbilt University in the States. She was a postdoctoral fellow in the History of Art Department at California, Berkeley, as well as at the Getty Research Institute and the Henry Moore Institute Research Fellow. And Courtney's paper is called Art and Black Consciousness. I need to get it onto the desk, yeah.
Do I just need to click on it? Okay. And then where did my... Oh, here it is.
Shall I dim the light?
Yeah, give me a little mood lighting. Before I really start, I just want to say almost everybody represented in this room in some ways has been incredibly generous to me in terms of building my body of research, and I'm sure this is true for almost all of the other art historians and curators here. And so Keith's invited to sort of open up your homes, and Shudipa as well. You all have done that for me, and so I'm incredibly grateful for that. Please open some more homes and archives, though. 1982, Rasheed Araeen was invited by the Wolverhampton Young Black Artists, that would be the WYBA, to speak at the first National Black Art Convention in Wolverhampton. Areen's theory of an all-encompassing political black art was tested against other proposals for art as he engaged the audience with his paper, Art and Black Consciousness. The paper advocated a confrontational, post-colonial approach to art that was both criticized and supported by various convention attendees. Perhaps his staunchest critic was the painter Frank Bowling, who recently returned to London from New York, took complete offense at the suggestion of black art by any definition or parameter. Friends for nearly 50 years, the artists came together this year, actually last week, to revisit their ideas about black art. In this paper, I want to briefly contextualize the short film that you'll see in just a minute and give a bit of history as to how they both come to the conference. In many ways, Bowling and Araeen were important figures for the younger artists in Wolverhampton, less so for their art and more so for their different responses to racism in the art world. In the late 1970s, Araeen transitioned from a formalist, minimalist sculptural practice to an art practice that was less tangible but noticeably more political. Where his materials had been steel and wood, they were now paper for installations and his body for performance. This is Areen's first significant political artwork, For Oluwale, 1971 to 1973, a 5-panel installation consisting of newspaper clippings and photocopies pasted to board. Drawn mainly from alternate news sources like the Freedom News, the paper of the British Black Panther political party, some of the black and white text concerned the death of Nigerian immigrant David Oluwale, who had been killed in Leeds in 1969. Other texts referenced the national investigation of the Leeds police force following Oluwale's death. This is Packy Bastard, portrait of the artist as a black person, Areen's performance of street and civic violence in Britain. This is the performance that many at the convention knew as a reference for Areen's engagement with what he called radical black art, an art not of race or ethnicity, but one of political reaction to race and class oppression. At the major conference on contemporary art and criticism in 1978, the State of British Art at the Institute of Contemporary Arts, Araeen introduced black art to the mostly white British art world audience, staging it as a fully realized methodology. By the time of the Wolverhampton Convention, his role in advocating for this way, i.e. radical black art, of making art was well known in London's white art world. But Araeen came into formal contact with the Wolverhampton Young Black Artists during their exhibition at the Africa Centre in London in 1982, though the group had exchanged letters with him in the previous year. Eddie exchanged letters with him, in fact. In the review of the show, he acknowledged that the group, quote, represents not an authentic black voice, but it is also a voice of humanity that refuses to be brutalized. No masterpieces are being offered here, since conditions to make masterpieces do not exist. What is being expressed is more important and more urgent. It is critical consciousness, if not conscience, of our time, end quote. What might at first read seem like a dismissal of the work on view, no masterpieces being offered, is Areen's actually deeply complimentary response to the show. The review singles out Eddie's four-part collage, Destruction of the National Front from 1980, and describes it as a fear that is transformed into hope by radical action. For Araeen, the WYBA made work like his own that was urgent and critical, two words that fulfilled his ideal of radicality. To Araeen, this art looked like what it was intended for, political activism. His paper advocated the examination of, quote, the condition of belonging to the post-colonial world, that is, not belonging to the center, but to the periphery. Ironically, however, the convention was likely the first time that Araeen actually presented black art to a periphery, that is, a predominantly African, Asian, and Caribbean black audience. After graduating from the Royal College in 1962 and moving to New York in late 1966, Bowling also transitioned from the abstracted figural painting, for which he was best known, to work that was fully non-representational. Birds from '61, a painting completed during his last year in school, hints at his coming transformation. It shows a figure abstracted in two different ways. The left panel of the diptych puts the semi-recognizable figures of two birds at a slight distance, as if to suggest the movement of flight or a view from above, the way that one might see an actual bird. On the right, the figures are closer, though less clear. The painting on the right is muddled, with what might be a bird's leg appearing as a few thin, streaky protrusions from the small black mass of paint that is its body. The white background is here a scratchy backdrop for the central figure. Bowling's entry into New York in '66 was at the beginning of a series of national events that happened to be located in New York, and his presence coincided with several of them. For example, he taught at Columbia in 1968, immediately following the strike in the spring of that year that unleashed a torrent of animosity among university administrators, the Upper Manhattan neighborhood, the surrounding campus, and students that did not abate for several years. Bowling was also on site during the January 1969 protests at the Metropolitan Museum of Art over the fractious Harlem on My Mind exhibition. During this time, he began to write about a group of Black American artists, including Melvin Edwards, Daniel Johnson, Al Loving, Jack Whitten, and William T. Williams, for Arts Magazine. With these artists, he explored the concept of Black art, specifically the relationship of Black art to abstraction. As a concept, Black art did not exist as such in Britain at the time. It was a discourse that he moved into and out of as a Black expat in New York, using his platform at Arts Magazine to discuss the issue of tethering artists to their race or making an assumption about aesthetic impetus based on the presumption of ethnic essence. In one of his earliest Arts Magazine articles, Bowling drew to the attention the spate of Black shows that were on view in New York in the spring of 1969. He described one in particular as the Nigger Room. Opening up the discussion of art as a part of a political process, he wrote that, quote, "It is neither possible nor desirable to separate the sudden appearance of black shows from the extant political mood. And since art and politics are, in this case, inseparable, there is no better time now than to create standards, end quote. His conflation of art, politics, and standards for art would not be needed as a directive in Britain for a decade to come. Yet within this discourse is the subtlety by which he explained how the events in America that garnered so much attention in the international press were related to New York and its art world. Within these texts, he is attempting to comprehend his own pull to New York and its painting. Because black art did not exist in Britain, Bowling, both black and British, was immediately invested in disclaiming race and civil rights as an aesthetic. His practice as a painter and a writer and his presence in New York overthrew an idea of what a British painter would look like, while his painting undermined the essentialist ideals associated with American black art. At the same time, his ability to describe the heated civic debate around black artists and politics in New York unmade his once outsider status as a black artist in Britain. His writing was absorbed by the artists that he was writing about in America. Many of them would later refuse to show in race-based exhibitions. Before moving back to London in the late 1970s, Bowling made a contentious claim about black art. Quote, "Much of the discussion surrounding painting and sculpture by blacks seems completely concerned with notions around black art, not with the works themselves or their delivery, not with a positively articulated object or set of objects. It is as though what is being said that whatever black people do in the various areas of the arts is art, hence black art. And various spokesmen make rules to govern the supposed new form of expression." Here, Bowling, as in each of his other articles on black art, is taking to task the American psyche, his description for the conditional relationship of black American artists afforded by Americans. In each endeavor, he notes that what black artists and their art need more than anything else is new criticism, one that he indicated would seamlessly encompass politics and aesthetics. Upon his return to London, he was no longer engaged with writing about art or being a spokesperson for black art in the manner of Araeen. Bowling's first contact with the Wolverhampton Young Black Artists comes via a letter from Marlene Smith, inviting him to the convention, among other things. Bowling attends, partly out of curiosity, with his friend, the Guardian writer Corinna Adam. Bowling was, by 1982, completely disengaged from conversations around race and art. And to many, his practice was, visually at least, politically neutral. Having been out of the country for several years, he was, as a teacher and a more seasoned artist, interested in seeing how the younger black artists in Britain were doing. But during the convention, he experienced resistance from some of the younger artists who felt he neglected the political vehicle of figuration for the supposedly apolitical freedom of abstraction. At the convention, Araeen presented an argument about black art as political art. From the audience, Bowling engaged in a few debates, usually to refute his investment in black art by any definition, be it Areen's or his previous involvement in America. Bowling's remarks during the convention suggest that the clear political stakes in the term were muddled, for him by the term's ethnic or racial implications. In either case, political or social, Bowling did not see his work as part of a black art agenda. Yet both, Araeen and Bowling, were drawn into a conversation about Aubrey Williams at the convention. Though absent, Williams was very much sort of present as a specter that hung over both generations, that of Bowling and Araeen, and then also the younger artist. And what appears to be complete disagreement during the convention, Araeen and Bowling enact a sort of similar role for it. Each is polemical in words. What is and is not black art, they argued through the audience. Where Araeen is bombastic and argumentative, Bowling is contemptuous. Each turns to pedagogy, seeing themselves as the de facto teachers for the younger generations. And both take equal turns chastising the audience of younger artists and art workers. Ultimately, their presence at the convention strategically aligns the WYBA artists with other Black art leaders in Britain. Their presence alone signifies the relevance of the convention and the artists alone. That they were there actually meant something, whether they liked being there or not. They also connect the convention to a longer history of artists in Britain working in the margins of a mainstream economic, cultural, and academic art environment.
The title of my talk is Art and Black Consciousness. My presentation today is an attempt to explore the meaning of the word black and to see how this represents our specific condition as a people and its relationship with art. When somebody shouts "black bastard" at us, is the meaning of black here same as when we call ourselves black? What's the significance for us of the difference between these two opposing meanings? At the end, I shall try to suggest that the radical understanding of the word black is important in the development of our art as part of our struggle for self-realization and assertion as equal human beings. When we say we are black people, what do we really mean by this?
I think you invited me, didn't you? You told me that this was happening and said that I should attend.
Well, I think I should, at the introduction, must say what happened. In some time in 1981, Guy Brett rang me, saying there's a show going on at Africa Center. You must go and see it. And so I went, and I was amazed. And it was, there was so much energy. I think there was a debate in the early 70s about the nature of black art in which Frank was involved.
Yes, I was. I came in on the discussion about what black art consisted of. You know, what was black art? It was just art practiced by black people, or was it that there's something special about it? And found that there was no significance or special difference between people who were making art that was to do with protest. There was very little difference between the kind of art that people were making all over the world that we were able to be aware of. People screaming heads, you know, people making work that consisted of violent, you know, one-to-one violence. So my argument was that there was nothing that the artists who happened to be black, they were doing of this illustration of suffering and man-to-man or person-to-person aggression, that there was any different. The only difference was that the faces were recognizably black that were being portrayed. I took the position that there was something else there in the work of artists who again happened to be black, but who were making abstract art.
Eddie Chambers.
In the Chambers, yes.
Yeah.
Eddie, yeah.
And we become friends.
Right.
Yeah. And actually I wrote about the show in the City Limits. And that was perhaps the first article written about black art. in Britain.
In Britain, yeah.
Then they were going to hold this convention in Wolverhampton,
Yes.
to which I was invited as a keynote speaker.
Mm-hmm.
My point in this, my paper was that you can't define black art just because it is being done by black artists.
Mm-hmm.
No, it was a moment in the history of British art,
That's right.
experienced
Mm.
by some people. The young black hair, by which I mean both Asian and African.
Yes.
Although black art came out from a group of young
Afro-Caribbean.
Afro-Caribbean art students.
Right.
They were still students
That was all students, yes.
because they went through the experience of racism
Mm-hmm.
while they were living in Britain, while they were being brought up.
In the inner cities.
So they immediately assume
Mm-hmm.
what they would be taught in art school will be underpinned by the racist art establishment.
Mm-hmm.
So they begin to think something different than what they expected to be taught in art school, from which it came what they call black art.
Yes.
Yeah, but if it was contained within the whole historical moment
Mm-hmm.
out of which black art came out, it would have become a movement.
It would have become, yeah.
A movement within the trajectory of British art.
Yes.
Problem here was that it was complex. It was on both sides. On the side of practitioners,
Mm.
who although were denouncing the system as racist and imperialist, at the same time expecting reconciliation from the system,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
which becomes a trap.
Absolutely.
And as a response to that, establishment adopted black art as a category in which to fit all black artists,
That's
all
right.
non-white artists. By the end of 80s, in fact, it became part of the agenda
Yes.
of the Art Council to promote
Promote
black
black art,
artists
yeah.
on that basis.
On that basis. I
But
can
the
see it now.
initial, we cannot blame the initial impact, or rather energy,
Mm-hmm.
which was genuine.
No, but you couldn't miss the fact that these
Yeah.
people were, they had a certain kind of energy.
It was
And
a
drive.
genuine experience,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a genuine expression of that experience.
Their deepest feelings.
But because they were not fully aware of history, and they did not allow themselves to
become acquainted with it.
to attain full knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
they were somehow in a hurry to shout, to tell the world who they were.
Yes, and these are my wounds sort of idea, yes.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think we can't dismiss that very specific particular period in British art.
I don't think we can, no. And
Yeah.
this is precisely why I feel and felt then that one would have to be a witness to this moment. In my own case, I felt that by the time that the Wolverhampton conference had come along, that I had my say about what black art could be as a special category of art coming out of the experience of the American experience. And I went up to Wolverhampton with a journalist from The Guardian because I thought that I was really unable to do much for that situation, because I'd had my say as to where, if there was ever going to be a black art.
So the issue, figuration versus abstraction, no longer the issue of black artists. It has become a global.
Absolutely, I agree there. Absolutely, I mean that it has become global.
Maybe we should drop this word black now.
Instead of black, what would you put? What term would you replace it with?
Why we have to? White artists don't define themselves
by their color. No,
race.
No.
Why should we define ourselves?
That's where I ended up in my attempts to set the foundation for the arguments. There is why black.
It is a complex problem. I have gone through myself as a commitment to political struggle.
Right.
My effort was to bring about your experience of art and experience of politics, experience of social together and create a synthesis. And that is what I have been involved for the last 30 years.
I don't
know if I have been successful or not. In my book, I call it an obstacle.
An obstacle.
An obstacle. What I have been trying for the last 30 years to overcome this obstacle so that your imagination becomes free.
Absolutely. And there I think we absolutely are one in that this is you couldn't have put my view in a nutshell much more neatly, because and you see, I try to use the fact that post the Atlantic experience, one of the pillars of a claim that could be made for black art was the fact that, to use that word, to overcome, right? You had to overcome, you had to...
yeah, but our problem is when you're trying to overcome that obstacle, you might spend whole life struggling against that obstacle. But I think there's a very important theoretical problem here, which applies not just to black art, but what is called radical art.
Radical art, yes. Yeah.
You see, there's a radical theory about art, which put forward the notion that art must confront the system. You see, basically it's correct, but if you take this confrontation at a social and political level, then you have a problem. If you maintain that confrontation at the level of language of art, then you get engaged in art. You found something to take it forward.
Mm-hmm.
But if you shift and the art function is to confront the system, like Dada or Surrealism, Surrealism to free your unconscious suppressed energy, which, produced something new, but it got stuck in the unconscious.
That's right, yes, yes.
So I think it's a problem. I'm putting forward this problem because it's no longer to do whether you're black or white. It is to do with art.
Well, it's not, it's, you know, one has to and one does, but it's not easy to do so. And,
Was
I'm
there,
sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go on, what were you going to say?
Was there any value for either of you after the convention? Did the convention give you anything? Did you take away any good ideas, any good interactions, besides meeting the artists?
Which convention?
The night
In Wolverhampton.
in Wolverhampton.
I don't know, it's difficult because my position was that it should be defined, that is, black art should be defined historically, a particular moment in the history of art in Britain.
In Britain, yeah.
You know, not only in terms of a specific experience of certain people, but they brought in particular kind of language which was missing in the trajectory of art. If they had stuck to that idea, it might have been different. But what happened after 4 or 5 years, black art began to be defined, particularly by Eddie Chamber. Anything done by a non-art artist should be considered black art. And that was the level, that was the point we split.
Well, in my own case, I came away from there. I came away from Wolverhampton feeling down because I felt that well.
But what did you expect from Wolverhampton?
I expected, I'm not sure that when I went, apart from the fact that I was...
Particularly when you already had the experience of early 70s in New York.
Yes, I don't know that I was expecting anything special. I think that I was expecting a lot of I was expecting, if anything, and I'm saying this 30 years later, I don't know that I would have said it after we got back on the train to get back to London. But I expected something, the kind of fireworks, I suppose, from these young people that happened immediately after the Metropolitan Museum Harlem on My Mind show, that there would be discussions in the public area. And it never happened. All that seemed to happen was like, the network that existed already had uncomfortable experiences, or in some cases no experience at all, because they were just simply turned off by the entire thing.
Can I ask you a very crude question?
Yes.
If you're living in a society which is racist, which is imperialist,
Yes.
shouldn't you say so?
Oh yes, and I think I have.
That touches on what Rasheed and Frank were talking about, but also extends to the conference. I'm working in the field of contemporary African art, and I've always been intrigued by the fact that the Black Art movement, if I take the Rasheed's essay, the success and failure of black art, sort of finishes. I put quotes because I think there's always a continuity in movements, but sort of finishes at the end of the 80s, at the moment where contemporary African art emerges at the end of the 80s. So I wondered if any of you had thought of what happened, and I'm interested in this shift.
Courtney, would you like to respond?
I think it's interesting that's because you're talking about the paper that's published in the Duke publication in 4/5, in Shades of Black. It is interesting because he does have all of this time for reflection, but what does happen for Rasheed as well is that he spends basically the moment that he leaves the convention up until 05 being mostly a writer and a curator. And his art gets sort of subsumed behind that. So there's a way in which you can read into that essay something quite personal and also quite timely, that just at the moment that many of the other artists represented here in this room whose careers are still going, his visibility is quite high, but his work is completely invisible. And yet you do have these other markets that open up, and he becomes, via third text and via other writings, the kind of interlocutor for all of those. Rasheed's essays on contemporary African art are some of the first that come out, and yet as an artist he's not participating, only as a writer and curator.
Sonia, you have a question.
I'm still Sonia. I'm still trying to formulate my question, but it's something to do with the division between the two positions, and your taking what you make of their two positions. I'm trying to, in a way, I see you've placed them. This person was thinking this, and this person was thinking that. But I'm wondering what you make of that split between whether one talks about the arts practice and somehow the maker is somehow behind that, or whether one talks about a practice that speaks of the maker in the work. So I'm just wondering what your position is.
I think their positions in some ways reflect how they actually attempted practice, right? So on the one hand, Rasheed doesn't see himself, I think, as separate from his practice, but his practice is activist. So making work is just as much a part of making art as going out in the streets and protesting or writing a polemical text or being the voice for that, right? Whereas Bowling seems to find a kind of I don't believe that as a person he is actually apolitical. And I think, in fact, that some of the most charged things that come out of what happens in the mid-'60s into the '70s in New York are actually his statements. I found, for instance, that reference to Nigger Room printed in several different places, and most of them unattributed. But when I asked him to attribute, because it had to have only come from him, he said no, he didn't think that that's the kind of thing that he would have thought at that time. So I think there is a kind of split for him between what happens in a very private painting practice versus what happens for him in a kind of the politics of this person. Same time, though, Frank misses the entirety of sort of the lead up to this moment because he's in New York and he's in a very different moment. He is in a, New York post-civil rights kind of situation, and he is also incredibly successful institutionally. He has a Whitney Museum show, so he's got all of the kind of accolades of mainstream success, whereas Rasheed is right here in the middle of this, fighting for it, and in some ways being a kind of a voice for many people to it, and the conduit to many people. So this might be more about place than it is, or as much about place as it is about person.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap up there. And so can we have some appreciation?
Thank Gary Stewart for making the film.
And of course.
Thank Gary Stewart for making the film.
Absolutely.